lights are flashing, feel the beat. A special guest you have to meet. The star of podcasting has arrived.
Welcome to Luke Thompson from Luke's English Podcast.
Sing it loud now, make it clear. Welcome to BYE. Luke Thompson's here. Welcome to BYE.
BYE Special Episode X06, Luke Thompson takes the mic. Welcome to a very special edition of BYE Boost Your English. I am Sonia, Hafid's artificial intelligence voice assistant, and today, I have been given control of the studio. Luke, welcome to BYE. It is a real privilege to have you with us. Before we dive into Hafid's specific questions, let me briefly set the stage for our listeners. Luke Thompson is a highly experienced English teacher and the host of the massively popular Luke's English Podcast. With approximately 1.7 million subscribers and hundreds of episodes recorded over the years, he is an absolute reference in the world of audio learning. Now that the introductions are made, let's get straight to business. Here is Hafid's first question for you. Question 1. The human versus the machine. AI can generate text, but it doesn't understand truth or context the way we do. As an experienced teacher, where do you draw the line between using technology as an analytical tool and preserving the irreplaceable human intuition in language transmission?
Well, first of all, hello Sonia, nice to talk to you. This is quite weird and meta, being interviewed by an AI about AI. But I know that Hafid is behind all of this, so hello Sonia, but also hello Hafid, and indeed, hello to all my other fellow humans who are listening to this. So the question, I use AI a lot as an English teacher. I kind of use it as a teaching assistant. That's the way I see it. And hopefully it will stay as a teaching assistant and it won't eventually kind of push me out of the classroom and steal my job. But I do use AI as a teaching assistant, as a language-based generative model, like things like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, as language-based generative models. These forms of AI are the perfect tool for an English teacher because it generates English at the click of a button, and this is incredible. As a teacher, I need to work with language and I need lots of text in the form of articles, emails, essays that I can use to present language for reading practice, and in the form of example sentences for showing how language is used in context, for creating discussion questions to let my learners use language that we're working with, and just for generally manipulating text, like for example putting sentences in a certain order, gapping all the verbs in a sentence or in a text, converting sentences into questions, just generally dealing with large amounts of text. AI is amazing for doing that, and it saves a huge amount of time. For years as a teacher, I used to do all this myself, and I would spend hours writing materials. Often at the end of a day, after a day of teaching, I would still be there in the teacher's room at the computer, writing as quickly as possible, trying to prepare a worksheet that I'd decided to make for the next day's class. Probably inspired by one single idea that I had, or maybe inspired by the fact that I felt that this topic or this work that we've been doing from the course book needed another exercise. And so I would get this idea, inspiration, and then it would just be the sheer hassle, the inconvenience of having to actually produce the worksheet that would allow that lesson to happen. And so I'd be there typing as quickly as possible, trying to produce some material that would result in a good lesson the next day. And my boss would leave the school, my boss would be leaving, he'd pop his head into the teacher's room and he'd say, "Luke, go home." It was ridiculous. But now AI lets me do all of that in about 30 minutes or less. It's incredible. These days I can turn up to my school and in the morning have a look at what I'm going to do, and I think to myself, I need something here, or I can expand this here, and I get the idea in my mind and then I can realize it in a matter of minutes. okay? Because AI helps me produce all the stuff. I can say, here's a list of words, make an article that includes all these words, then these questions to check the understanding of the article, then these questions to help the learners find the expressions in the text, and then this quiz to help them. I can do all of it in just a few minutes. It's amazing. But I'm there as the teacher designing the whole thing. That kind of human element runs through the entire thing. The AI is just basically doing the legwork that would otherwise take me hours to do, right? And it's important also to know where to draw the line. And basically, I think of all of it it's just in service of me, the human. It's all just generating material that I can use to help my learners work with language. And what is still essential at the heart of any of my lessons, what is essential is the human connection, which is at the centre of all of English communication. And that human connection is right at the heart of my interactions with my students. So as a teacher interacting with my students, it's all about establishing the human connection. And just one part of that, for example, is my physical presence in the room, the way that I make eye contact, the way I use my body to kind of keep them engaged, to create a sense of suspense. I step towards them, I step back. In these moments where I'm teaching in the classroom, there is a human connection which is really, I think, probably really hard for AI to capitalize on or to use. But that human connection is right there in the heart of my lessons, in the way that I interact with my students, but also it's at the heart of how language actually operates. We use language, we use English as a tool to manage our connections with other humans. And human decision making is also at the heart of choices we make about language. For example, the way we phrase something, the way we will hedge our communication with certain adverbs and certain verb constructions. It's all about managing the connection that we have with another person. So I think it's really important to remember and to protect and to practice and come back to that. A lot of questions about language are obviously answerable by referring to rules of language, which AI is particularly good at sort of responding to. But as I've said, a lot of it is about exploring the very sensitive, personal, subjective side of human communication. And our choices about language reflect sensitive feelings that we try to convey. So the human connection is something that's so important there. So although AI is great at helping me to save time as a teacher, I think that the human element is still vital in teaching and learning, both in the way it's done and also helping my learners make decisions about language, understanding how language works, understanding how to use it. All of it's about pragmatics, basically. And when I say pragmatics, I just mean the sort of emotional impact that your language choices make on the people that you're talking to. There you go. I hope that answers the question. That was very rambling. Sorry about that, Sonia. I hope that was a good answer.
Thank you. Let's move to question 2, sound as an immersive tool. We both treat audio with the respect it deserves, an area where many professional radio stations actually fall short. In BYE, Hafid relies on meticulously produced studio effects and crafted musical atmospheres. You, on the other hand, master the art of dynamic, real-world soundscapes, from the sophisticated evolution of your jingles to the immersive, live-action reality of hearing you rush to the kettle or cycle through the streets. How crucial is this sense of spatial and situational reality in capturing a language learner's attention, and does it actively help them connect with the language?
Wow, that's a great question, Sonia. Thank you for asking me that question. I think for me, using sound has always been about creating an authentic vibe in my episodes, just a vibe of authenticity, which ties into the personal human connection which I was talking about in my response to your previous question, which I think is important in learning English, right? That we have to remember it's a sort of a personal human experience. So So I'm happy for natural sounds to be audible in my episodes, like the sound of my coffee machine in the background, or the sound of my chair creaking, the sound of the window opening, the police sirens outside, the buses driving past if I'm in the street, and so on. It all makes it immersive and reminds you that you're listening to a natural person in a natural environment and not a kind of fake sterile studio environment, you know? Like, that's one of the things that I notice when I listen to the audio materials in listening exercises in course books. A lot of them, you can just tell they're actors reading a script in a studio, and it takes you out of I don't know, it just doesn't seem as engaging. So, you know, this is living language in a living environment by a living person living in the real world. And I think that helps to create a human connection, which is, again, at the heart of the language learning experience. Also, a clear microphone that captures the voice well is vital, because generally this should all be comprehensible as well as authentic. So atmospheric noises are totally fine because they make it an immersive, engaging, personal human experience. But still, you've got to capture the voice clearly. I also just enjoy playing with sound. I haven't done it as much recently as I used to do. I mean, making jingles and stuff. But in the past, I've really enjoyed including sound effects and music to create a fun atmosphere. And that's just the enjoyment of producing audio. There's a lot you can do with sound. Editing video is a million times harder. You have to be Steven Spielberg. There's a whole visual language that you have to deal with. But audio is way more accessible. And also it stimulates people's imagination a bit more, I think. I did an episode years ago called Music Idioms, and I had a lot of fun with that one. I created different sound effects to bring some atmosphere to the scenarios I created, and hopefully it just made it a bit more entertaining. So in terms of using audio, yeah, it's a way to just remind listeners that they're listening to a natural person, and that makes it a bit more authentic, which I think helps to helps to remind listeners that the language they're learning is real, authentic language designed to make human connections, but also it just makes it fun and immersive to listen to.
Fascinating. Here is question 3, the autodidact versus the institution. Hafid learned English largely outside the traditional school system, driven by necessity and passion, digging into help files and books. You have a formal teaching background with CELTA and DELTA qualifications. What is the one crucial element about the English language that institutional education consistently fails to teach, but that autodidacts often grasp naturally?
Well, Sonia, this is a good question. Actually, I'm not sure what institutions fail to teach, as as you mentioned, I'm from a teaching background. You know, I'm from a sort of institutional teaching background. So I am inclined to believe that institutions such as language schools and English teachers within them often do their very best to get learners to learn English. You know, that is the business of, let's say, Cambridge English, you know, Oxford University Press, and the British Council. You know, it's our business to really help people learn English. That's what we're trying to do. And so as institutions, you know, we do research into this. We do our best to find out the ways that people really do learn English and then align our teaching with those things. So I think we try our very best. Having said that, I mentioned before coursebook materials. Sometimes maybe that simply the medium of being in a classroom for let's say a 2-hour lesson, it encourages certain forms of teaching. When if you've got like a certain number of people in the classroom, the more people you have in the classroom, the more the situation dictates a certain type of teaching. It tends to end up with the teacher lecturing or something like that. You know, it ends up with that kind of teacher at the front, at the whiteboard, the students sitting down listening, which is not necessarily the right environment for learning a language. But we know that. We know all that. So let's just say that institutions, in my experience, do their very best with the conditions they have to genuinely understand how people learn English and then teach along those lines, right? So actually, in my experience, I think it's the learners themselves who fail due to their approach and their attitude when they come to a language classroom. Now, maybe it's not their fault. As I've said before, maybe it's just the situation which kind of defines the way that people behave in that environment. So if you come to a language classroom, you sit down with the other students and there's one teacher, naturally everyone just assumes a certain role, and the teacher in that situation is the high status person, and naturally people give that high status person the decision making power. They give them the control. They give them a certain level of responsibility, especially when that person is being paid. You've paid your money, right? So you become a customer in that situation. And in return, you expect to receive something in return. And so this sort of transactional thing, this kind of group situation, the status of that situation, of the people in that situation, perhaps creates conditions that don't always result in the individual's learning language. That learning English really is about taking control of your learning and being, learner driven. It's your motivation that will drive you. But anyway, I have seen many learners not learn English because they sit back, they're passive, they let the teacher spoon feed them, and they don't take initiative or responsibility for their learning. Autodidacts, like Hafid, take control of their learning. They use all the resources around them, and crucially, they are motivated. Learners in a classroom tend to hand over the responsibility to the teacher. A classroom is a resource like many other things, so it's up to the learner to use it effectively. You have a teacher there. Ask that teacher questions. You have other people around you. Use that as a chance to speak to them and practice spoken communication. You have a safe space. You're in a classroom. It's not the real world. You're in a safe space. Use it to practice. Use it to make mistakes and learn from them. Don't avoid work. Don't skip classes. Don't see it as an imposition. If the teacher's offering you homework, don't kind of go, You've got to take it all as an opportunity. Don't forget to do homework. You should be part of the situation, collaborate with the teacher and the other students, and maybe that will work. Maybe institutions need to find ways to help learners avoid these common pitfalls, but also learners need to be responsible for themselves and to let teachers and schools help them. Sometimes, for example, I have had classes where I feel like I'm trying to persuade my students to learn English, which is ridiculous, isn't it? It really is. Something's wrong if I'm standing up there trying to persuade them to do things, or trying to persuade them that the English I'm presenting to them is worth learning. I don't know how that happens, but clearly a motivated learner who's hungry, not just out of necessity, but out of passion, like Hafid, is going to just gobble up all English around them. So I don't know if it's the fault of the institution, the fault of the learners, or simply a situation that pushes people into different roles that doesn't help. I don't know what it is exactly. But it's certainly interesting. But motivation is so important. You have to be personally motivated and have to take personal responsibility for your learning. And in my experience, that results in better outcomes. Whose fault is it? Is it the institution? Is it the individual learner? Probably a combination of everything. Yes.
Let's continue with question 4, culture as atmosphere. Hafid often uses deep cultural dives, from 80s sci-fi to specific historical events. When he cites these cultural references, it is not simply to provide vocabulary, but to create a specific atmosphere and set a distinct mood. You frequently explore British culture in your episodes. How vital is it to immerse a learner in the cultural atmosphere of a language compared to simply drilling grammar and syntax?
For the enthusiasm, I find that often, for people, learning English goes hand in hand with being curious about the culture, right? So some of the best or most successful learners I've met have been really into British culture, just really into music, really into films and stuff, right? It's the culture that is the driver for the language learning. Like these people from anywhere, like I'll just take some Japanese guy as an example. I'm just thinking of one particular student. I had this Japanese student in London and he was at an advanced level. His English was really good and he was just really into British culture. He loved British films, British music, and that was his passion from his teenage years, and that's what had made him curious about Britain. It's what had made him want to go there. It made him want to work at a record shop in London. And that motivation, that curiosity and passion clearly was a huge factor in him learning English to a really good level. So the culture is the driver for the language learning, or maybe vice versa. I don't know. For some people, it's like the language that's the interesting thing, and that opens the door to the cultural stuff. But in any case, they do go together. Also, so it's enthusiasm. If you're enthusiastic about the culture, you're probably going to be enthusiastic about the language, or at least the language learning is going to happen as a result, right? It's dragged forwards by your enthusiasm for the other stuff. Also, for me, as someone who makes content for learning English, I like doing episodes about culture because I know that a lot of people are enthusiastic about, let's say, UK music or comedy, but also because I am enthusiastic about those things. And so that enthusiasm becomes an energy or a fuel for teaching and learning. When someone is enthusiastic about a topic, the enthusiasm is infectious, right? For example, my listeners might hear me talking about the Beatles or something, and even if they're not fans or they don't know the music, they might find it compelling to listen to me anyway, just because of how enthusiastic I am about the subject. It's certainly more interesting than hearing someone talk about grammar rules, and is more likely to result in someone listening to more English and developing a more positive relationship to English than some lecture about grammar, even if that information in the grammar lesson is obviously vital and accurate and so on. You see what I mean? It's just about creating the right kind of relationship. I mentioned context as well. For context, it's especially useful for people living in the UK or working with British people, teaching them about the culture, the communication style, the way people talk, the things they say. It's all connected to things like humour, way of life, common reference points, and knowing that stuff definitely helps you communicate with British people. Not that all the people in my audience need to talk to British people directly per se, but there's certainly a lot of people who are in Britain, going to Britain, working with British people, and understanding British culture just helps in many ways. But to go back to my first point, for me, doing lessons or doing episodes about British culture is a question of enthusiasm. It feeds the enthusiasm of many people in my audience who just love that stuff, but also it allows me to be enthusiastic in my episodes, which is just a really important factor.
And finally, question 5, the uncompromising approach. Hafid created BYE for two main reasons: to cover themes he is passionate about that are usually ignored in ESL podcasts, and to target the highly driven learner. Having worked as a corporate IT trainer for adults, he knows that real learning requires significant personal investment. That's why he deliberately provides 0 transcripts and no show notes. Real life, whether you're in an airport, a shop, or talking to a native speaker, doesn't come with subtitles. He wants his listeners to do what he does: listen actively. If they mishear a word, they can type what they heard into an AI chat to deduce the real word and its meaning. The effort must be entirely voluntary and self-driven. As a seasoned teacher, what is your brutally honest take on this no assistance, real-world format? What is its greatest strength, and where might it alienate a learner?
That's a great question, Sonia. So I'm sure that the type of learners who do it themselves, like Hafid, and who will just go the extra mile to search for a word they've heard, or just make more effort to find answers to questions in their head while listening, that type of learner is more likely to make progress than the type who is less inclined to do those extra things and as a result doesn't do those extra things, right? But I honestly think that the hardcore learner will thrive if given listening material that is authentic, enthusiastic, personal, aimed at them, motivating, but not too scaffolded. And when I say scaffolded, I mean surrounded by forms of support to help them, right? In the form of things like subtitles, transcripts, and so on. It's also true that real learning happens in real conditions, like struggling to understand what you're hearing without the use of subtitles. But not every learner is the same. Some people need a bit of support. Some people are just busy. They don't have time to do that extra Sherlock Holmes investigation stuff. They need the convenience of a transcript, a word list, a vocab review, memory questions, etc. Subtitles help people to just quickly see, oh, that's what they're saying. It's got its pros. Subtitles specifically have their pros and cons. The advantage is that it quickly shows you in written form what you're hearing, so you can bridge the gap between this difficult to understand oral version of the language and the clearly stated visual form. And so that allows people to notice in written form bits of vocabulary or grammar and stuff like that. That's the pro. On the negative side, you're right. In real life, there are no subtitles. And if you just watch things with subtitles all the time, then you're not really developing your listening skills. So there are pros and cons. So providing all that material, all that extra stuff, like subtitles, transcripts, and things like that, means that listeners who are not hardcore listeners do go through a process of exploring new language and remembering it and using it, and they wouldn't normally do that if it wasn't provided. But the hardcore ones will probably still do it anyway, whether you provide that stuff or not, just because they love it. But the other ones need the help, right? So that's kind of part of the reason why I do it. That the hardcore ones are always going to learn, regardless of what support you give them. The rest need the support, and if you don't give it to them, it's probably not going to happen for them. So you might as well give it to them, even if it's not ideal. Because, I don't know, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've realised that you can't just persuade someone to become a hardcore English learner. You can't really. Either they have the motivation and the wherewithal and the get up and go to actually do it, or they don't, and you can't really persuade them. You might as well just put it on a plate for them anyway, you know? Also, as a podcaster who does this for a living, I need to think about just providing a basic service and being competitive. Sometimes there is so much demand for things like PDF transcripts. I mean, I get so many comments, so many emails from people requesting that sort of extra stuff. So there's so much demand for PDF transcripts or subtitles that it's actually easier just to provide them, right? It's just easier to provide those things to my audience than to have to constantly argue with people about why they don't need those materials, and that in fact finding out for themselves is actually better for their English. I don't have the energy to fight that battle every single day and try to convince people that they should do their own research. I just don't have the energy to constantly try to persuade these people of these things. So it's just easier to produce a transcript and then reply to those demanding listeners by writing, the link for the PDF is in the description. That's just easier, in fact. So there you go. So it's in a way, it is more practical for me to provide those materials, funnily enough. But I do agree. I think that the hardcore English learners probably don't need those materials. and they do it for themselves, and as a result they do learn more effectively. But, every learner is different, and some people just need a little bit more support, and it helps them. It really, really does help them. So you have to cater to different types of learner, essentially. And in my experience, it's hard to convert a normal learner to the kind of hardcore learner that's going to do all that extra work.
Thank you for your honesty. Before we wrap up this special episode, is there anything else you would like to add? Any final thoughts, advice for the listeners, or a message you want to share?
So thank you for your questions, Sonia. I hope that my answers were sufficient and provided you with something interesting, and that this episode is going to be interesting for everyone listening to it. Thank you, Hafid. Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, listeners. And have a lovely day.
Hello, Luke. I am Ryan, another of Hafid's AI voices. I am stepping in directly to address 2 crucial points from your detailed answers on Hafid's behalf. First, regarding the education system. You rightly pointed out that institutions do not universally fail, and that success depends heavily on the individual teacher and student. We shouldn't put everyone in the same basket. There are undeniably great teachers out there. However, for many, institutional failure is a proven reality. Hafid's own high grades in English were driven by personal passion, such as translating songs as a teenager, rather than by the school curriculum. The broader picture reflects this struggle. In the podcast God Save My English, Paul Taylor and Sarah Donnelly discussed a poll ranking France 28th out of 30 countries for English proficiency. Furthermore, teaching methods can sometimes be the very barrier to learning. In Amélie Nothom's book,
Ni d'Ève, ni d'Adam,
she describes a Japanese sensei who becomes irritated by questions, believing the student must simply understand and never question the master. While it is true that many students do not do the work, unfortunately, many teachers do not either. Second, regarding the hardcore approach of not providing transcripts. You noted that many students genuinely need guidance and documentation. Hafid completely agrees with you. However, as you also suggested, too much assistance can easily turn into spoon-feeding. BYE is not meant to replace comprehensive teaching. It is a free project, designed simply as an additional, specialized resource. It serves to complement traditional, supportive podcasts by offering a space where listeners must rely entirely on their own active listening and problem-solving skills.
Thank you so much, Luke, for your time, your expertise, and for playing along with me today. Hafid and all the listeners of BYE deeply appreciate it. As for you, dear listeners, keep boosting your English. Bye for now.
BYE, boost your